Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, August 9th, 2021. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, publisher of the Black Star News, author of Manufacturing Hate, How Africa Was Demonized in Western Media. Milton Allimadi will be here to talk about that book and understanding the Ethiopia Tigray conflict. Meanwhile, the UN IPCC report, the Earth is warming at a significantly faster rate than previously thought. In other horrible news, U.S. now averaging 100,000 COVID infections per day, and deaths are rising too. Delta variant now accounts for 94% of all new infections. The FDA is fast-tracking a third dose for immunocompromised. Supreme Court. Here's Indiana University students' case to try and block the university's vaccine mandate. The Portman Cinema so-called bipartisan infrastructure deal on track for passage this week. Schumer vows the same for the reconciliation bill. Joe Biden extends the student loan repayment pause into 2022. Cuomo's top aide resigns as he scrambles to avoid impeachment. The Taliban seized their first provincial capital since the withdrawal announcement. And facing a massive unemployment insurance cliff in less than 30 days, Joe Manchin says, I don't care. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us this week. Joining me, as always, is Emma Vigland. Hello, Emma. How are you?
Hello, Sam. I'm well.
I got to tell you, I am feeling, increasingly anxious. I mean, about what's happening with the Delta variant. Just about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I spoke with David Wallace Wells for the show Reported that we do on Peacock as well, and he had written a piece that the children were safe all along, and that the children were just simply not that susceptible to the wild type COVID. And there had been really no data, just only 3 weeks ago, regarding the Delta variant. But this variant is significantly more transmittable. It moves quicker. And the initial reports were that the vaccines were protecting people somewhat from breakthrough infections, but very largely against hospitalization and death. And it still appears that it does it for death. It is less clear, what's happening in terms of hospitalizations. But we are seeing commensurate rise in hospitalizations and deaths. That is not necessarily the same ratio that we saw back in the peak during January, but we also don't have the same amount of testing going on. And so it's hard it's really hard to know what's going on. This thing is moving so quickly, the Delta variant.
People are less likely to get tested when they're vaccinated.
Much less likely.
So we don't, yeah, right.
There's less opportunities too. I mean, I know just, around Brooklyn, like the places where I would get tested, they're like, well, we closed that one because there was nobody getting tests. And now they're all starting to get booked up again. And it's tricky. People have got to be careful. People are less, not wearing masks as much, and it's a problem.
Yeah, and the places that are getting hit the hardest are obviously the places with the lowest vaccination rates. I mean, the fact that only 35%, I think that's the figure I wrote down here, 35% of people in Alabama and Mississippi, residents who are eligible, are fully vaccinated. With this Delta variant, I mean, we're going to see an exponential increase in deaths, and we're already up to over 500 on a rolling average. And there was this insane Wall Street Journal piece that came out yesterday, and they profiled people who were vaccine hesitant, including this one woman named Shonda Parrish. She's a nurse. She has cancer. Her father and stepmother died of COVID, and she's a nurse. I'm repeating that. So she's literate when it comes to medical information, refuses to get vaccinated. She's
also presumably working with around sick people.
Yeah.
Who might be a little more susceptible. It's stunning. And we should also say that, we have 70% vaccination rate amongst adults in this country, but it is not fully vaccinated. I think we're still just hovering around, maybe not even quite 50% fully vaccinated yet. And so it's really, it's scary. People have got to just be careful for their sake, for the rest of society's sake. And meanwhile, you got Ron DeSantis down there in Florida, just pretending like none of this is happening. It's really stunning. And Florida now represents 20% of all cases in the country. And again, this thing's moving so fast. When you look at a 14-day average, I would suspect that at one point, the epidemiologists or whomever it is who look at these, who set up these metrics, that it makes more sense to look at a 14-day average to get a sense of what the trend is. They may at one point say, this thing moves so much faster. You only have 3 or 4 days for it to incubate, as opposed to 5 to 11 or whatever it was in the wild type. This thing incubates so much faster
and multiplies so much faster
that you may have a more accurate, and I don't know, I'm not a statistician, but that you may have a more accurate picture of what's actually happening with a narrower window, because you're actually 14-day trailing has a significantly distorting impact on where this is headed going forward. But we'll see. But folks should just be conscious and be careful out there. The idea of masking, and particularly, if you can get a KN95 mask, you're going into a crowded place. We're already starting to think about what are we going to do about the office here, but I think we're all pretty good about masking up in other environments. But still, it's something to start to think about so that we can avoid, around, I don't know, where are we, 6 of this? 5, 4? I have no idea.
In terms of
how many times have we been going through? Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I mean, speaking of rounds, I feel like I've been punched in the face multiple times by this virus. So I just, I'm luckier than most, but it's just the
Is
idea
that a worker virus?
Yeah. The idea that we're dealing with, I mean,
Yeah, I know.
And the longer that this goes on, people keep saying, I'm seeing when I'm bemoaning people who are unvaccinated or like, I don't even know what to say. They get these, we're trying to convince people. People are like, oh, Darwinism. No, it affects you too, because the longer this is out in the ether, the more it's going to metastasize and become even worse than the Delta variant.
There's a lot more letters in the Greek alphabet.
Than Delta?
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yep. So keep that in mind, folks. Meanwhile, the latest reporting, and we heard this just about an hour ago, is that it appears that Schumer thinks he's going to be able to vote on this Cinema Portman infrastructure bill within like 24 hours.
Right.
And this is, I don't know, one of the saddest statements we could ever make about anything. I don't know if it's just human nature or American politics or what, or this era, but they really want to get to vacation. So it is creating a lot of incentive for them to just vote on this combined,
the glory of our democracy.
I mean, if we could get between Kristen Sinema and her wine, I think we might have some real leverage here.
$4 trillion worth of spending.
She's got a wine tasting to get to. Let's go.
I mean, honestly, it's I guess whatever it takes, but it is just an incredible. It's an incredible dynamic. The other dynamic, which I've been talking about for a while, is that Democrats, and are there, deficiencies? And of course, but they're trying to pass $4 trillion of new spending that are going to have structural implications for our economy and universal pre-K, free community college. I mean, I would just go on and on here. A child allowance that will last at least 5 years and be hard to roll back. All of these things, and there's much more. And it certainly will be the biggest, certainly the biggest expenditure of federal expenditure in terms of like programs since I think like Medicare. And then the Republicans are really worried about critical race theory being taught to kindergartners.
One side says this, the other side says this, and it's hard to determine who's correct, right?
What's fascinating is, let's take a dip into that world. Here is Senator Bill Cassidy, and he's on with Fox White House correspondent Jackie Heinrich. And here's Bill Cassidy lamenting the fact that he belongs to the Republican Party in some way.
Down the MAGA rabbit hole we go.
Structure. Now, you also had to clear up some misinformation about critical race theory in this bill. You said on Twitter that equity is not a catchphrase for CRT. Were you surprised you had to address that? And what does it say about how far apart the two parties are?
No, I will say that people are deliberately misrepresenting the bill. There is one single line, or maybe two, maybe three, in this bill, which says that if you take a grant from the federal government, you cannot discriminate. And then it plugs in anti-discrimination language, which is already in federal law. Okay, so I get a grant. I'm supposed to make sure everybody has access to the internet. Should I be allowed to discriminate? Of course not. It has nothing to do with CRT. It is something put out there, misinformation by those who should know better, in an effort to decrease support for bridges, roads, flood protection, coastal restoration, and hundreds of thousands of jobs. I don't know why they're doing it.
So at this stage...
You don't know why they're doing it?
Well, I mean, who are those people that should know better?
That's the thing, is these anti-CRT people, if they were honest about it, they would say, yes, you should be able to discriminate.
Well, that's the other thing.
Yeah, right.
That's the other thing. He thinks he's out of the hot water. Like, I mean, it's already, and this is just, it's fascinating. I mean, there is a fascinating dynamic here in that, and I don't know who's watching, a Fox Weekend. I mean, I'd like to see him go on, on Tucker. And
although
say
we
that,
did see him go on Laura Ingraham.
Right. And get screamed
testy,
down.
Yeah.
The Republican Party, their base, does not like their politicians. There's no judgment on my part here. This is a dynamic that people should understand. This guy's going to pass an infrastructure bill, the benefits of which are largely going to accrue to his constituents and to Republican constituents as well. I mean, also Democratic constituents. But
well, they didn't like their politicians until one guy came around.
Well, that's true. But the point being that Democrats, for better or for worse, generally like their politicians. And we saw this play out in Ohio to some extent with Nina Turner's loss. I think probably Democrats subscribe to her vision of what America would be like. We know this from the polling in terms of Medicare for all and other proposals, but they just have an affinity for 90% of Democrats support Joe Biden. The Schumer and Pelosi, as much as it may frustrate us, and I don't necessarily share this perspective, I don't, they're like 40% approval rating, positive approval rating.
40 plus.
40 plus in terms of like they're favorable to unfavorable.
Right.
And so this is a dynamic that those of us who are to the left of the center of the Democratic Party need to be aware of. But it's also fascinating in terms of the Republicans, like they're going to pay for passing this infrastructure bill. And they are caught between a rock and a hard place because they cannot appeal to those voters that they lost or have sort of drifted for them because of Donald Trump, and also their base just in voting for for an infrastructure bill. This is not a controversial thing.
Right. Well, I mean, so that's the split. The Republicans within they're fine eating each other, I guess, and ripping each other limb from limb in the Republican caucus as long as they can get some brownie points on critical race theory. See, you know, whoever the most MAGA senator is fine with throwing Cassidy under the bus because his bipartisan infrastructure framework includes the word equity or equality, and then just a
reiteration of what's already in federal law. You cannot discriminate.
Yeah, but
if you're getting governmental grants.
Right, but it secretly means critical race theory. So look at me. I'm the guy that's looking out for you, and I'm the one who's not going to be in favor of indoctrinating your children through infrastructure, ? And don't worry, they'll stay pure and white. And so that's the game that they play. They're fine with that because they have a larger project in mind. And they'll just shuffle in, if Cassidy's out, some other corporate drone who can do the bidding of their donors in the Republican Party and the conservative projects. It's a different dynamic.
Should be interesting to see. And if I'm the Democratic Party, as soon as this bill passes, I tout the equity in it. That's what I do.
Yeah.
Down in Louisiana. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Milton Allimadi. He's the publisher of the Black Star News and the author of Manufacturing Hate, How Africa Was Demonized in Western Media. Be right back after this moment. A couple of sponsors today.
Whoa.
One is, folks know I am a little bit challenged when it comes to dressing and myself, and certainly shopping for my own clothes is also somewhat problematic. One of my solutions, Stitch Fix. Much easier to let Stitch Fix do the hard work. Stitch Fix offers clothing that is hand-selected by expert stylists for your unique style, size, and budget.
Styes?
Your size?
I
try and combine it together.
No, it's
style.
Just,
like some people like things that are too big for them.
You're
That's
still
your size.
thinking about my eye issue last week.
Every piece is chosen to fit you and your life, so you can look and feel your best. And here's the thing: you try your pieces on at home, and you do so before you buy. You keep the ones that you love. You return the ones that you don't. Stitch Fix has free shipping and easy returns or exchanges. They put a prepaid return envelope included in your initial package. There's no subscription required. You pay just a $20 styling fee for each box, which gets credited towards pieces you keep. There are no hidden fees ever. Stitch Fix has styles and clothing to fit any occasion for women, kids, and men. They ship all over the U.S., available in the U.K. as well. The last Stitch Fix I got had two things in it that I was looking at specifically. One was a gray polo, because I was like, hey, I should mix it up on Fridays, not just blue polo all the time. Get a gray polo. And then the other one was a blue Riley Searsucker short sleeve shirt. They both showed up. I didn't like the gray polo. It was the colors were a little bit different than I thought it was. But then, surprise, I love the Searsucker shirt. I think it was...
you wore it the other day, I think.
I did.
Yeah.
Brendan said it was slimming on me. And that was enough for me to say, like, I'm keeping this.
I also like that gray polo that you returned.
I sent it back, but it was so easy. That was the thing that was amazing about it. And then they have a sense at this point of what my style is. They recommended, I'm still waiting on this, but it's not really something I'm going to need until the fall. It is a Method baseball style sweater. Zipper sweater style.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to that. Anyways, you can get started today at stitchfix.com/majority. You get 25% off when you keep everything in your fix. That's what they call the box that they send you with all the styles. That's stitchfix.com/majority for 25% off when you keep everything in your fix. stitchfix.com/majority. And every day, when I do this show, I've got two things. 2 bottles of this. Now, one's empty right now because that's already poured into my glass. I've got the other bottle in the fridge, and that is Liquid IV. 16 ounces of water with Liquid IV hydrates faster and more efficiently than water alone. Plus, Liquid IV tastes great. They got flavors like watermelon, which is exactly what's in my cup right now, strawberry and lemon lime. All very summery, but for me, also my go-to every day is the matcha because it gives me a little bit of a caffeine boost and also hydrates me simultaneously. Liquid IV contains 5 essential vitamins, more vitamin C than an orange, as much potassium as a banana, and it's healthier than sugary sports drinks. There's no artificial flavors, no artificial preservatives, less sugar than an apple. Liquid IV is powered by cellular transport technology, gives you an optimal ratio of glucose, sodium, potassium. It delivers water and nutrients into the bloodstream. And the company has donated over 4 million servings in response to COVID-19, which is nice.
Very nice.
It is, if I've had too much to drink, next morning, Liquid IV sets me up.
Or if you remember.
Yes, I have it at night.
Or if you remember, the key to do it is at night.
Exactly.
Before you sleep.
But it's now just become a staple. I'm like, why not have more hydration every day? And that's what I do during the show. And, start traveling. Super easy to carry with you. If you're going out and about, super easy to keep in your backpack or your little shoulder sling. That's what I do. Grab your Liquid IV in bulk nationwide at Costco, or you can get 25% off when you go to liquidiv.com. Use the promo code MajorityRep at checkout. It's 25% off anything you order when you get better hydration today using promo code MajorityRep. MajorityRep at liquidiv.com. And lastly, another thing that I use almost daily basis. I mean, I don't buy that much stuff, but we all shop online. I tend to do more so than I have in the past. And you know the story I've told my daughter when she was, first looking at stuff to buy online, always search for a promo code. And then one day I said to her, guess what? You don't have to do this anymore. Both of us have Honey on our browser. It's a free shopping tool. Scours the internet for promo codes, applies the best one, and then adds it to your cart. Honey supports over 30,000 stores online, tech sites, gaming products, Matt, popular fashion brands, even food delivery. And this is what happens. Basically, you just go through your shopping. You install the applet to your browser. It takes about 5 seconds. Then you forget about it until you're just at checkout. Honey drops down. It searches coupons. And one of two things happens. A, it knocks a couple bucks off. Great. It was no effort whatsoever. Or it tells you there are no coupons, and then you don't have to have that anxiety of like, did I miss out on something? Leave money on the table. That's what I like about
that.
Yeah,
it also tells you when if the price is lower than it normally is, if it's dipped. I like that tool too.
I bought a beanbag chair recently for
you did that.
Mila's a little birthday soiree that's happening in less than a week, and I saved $5. I didn't have to do anything. It was great. Super easy. Because I've saved on tech stuff in the past that we bought around the office, everything. If you don't already have Honey, you could be straight up missing out on free savings. It's literally free and installs in a few seconds. And by getting it, you'll be doing yourself a solid and supporting this podcast. I would never recommend something I don't use. I think folks know that. And I use it every time I purchase something, in one fashion or another. Get Honey for free at joinhoney.com/majority. That's joinhoney.com/majority. I should also say happy birthday to my daughter today.
Oh, it's Mila's birthday today?
Yep. Longtime
happy
listeners will remember when that took place. All right. I want to welcome to the program Milton Allimadi. He's the publisher of the Black Star News and author of his most recent Manufacturing Hate, How Africa Was Demonized in Western Media. Milton, I'm here with Emma Vigeland. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Milton, I want to start with your book, and then I want to have you catch us up on what's going on in Ethiopia.
Okay.
But your book it's fascinating. You went in and basically, well, tell us how you started research, because the start of this book really took place quite a while ago, and it ultimately led to the writing of this book, which essentially talks about how from I guess really for decades now, the Western media has been creating this narrative about Africa that has led that perpetuates racism, I guess. But please.
Okay. Well, maybe some brief background and context. I was born in Uganda, so I grew up partly in Uganda and in Tanzania, and I started reading newspapers on a regular basis when I was around 12 years old, when I was living in Tanzania at that time. And I noticed Africa and, Black people in general were always depicted in a certain way in Western media. I was reading the New York Times, Time Magazine, Newsweek, and whatever I could get my hands on at the US Information Services. So it's something that bothered me, and I know it bothered many Africans while you're growing up, but there's not much you can do about it. So I didn't really have a chance to do anything till I got to Columbia University. And when I was doing the master's program in I decided to write my thesis on the Times. And I focused on the New York Times because the Times archive goes really way back. One of the earliest writings about Africa I encountered was an editorial from 1877. And basically, it reflected the kind of writings that were popularized by the so-called explorers, Europeans who went to, quote unquote, discover Africa. And basically, those were agents, of course, of imperialism. They were laying the groundwork, they were doing the research, finding out about each country, what resources they had. And that, of course, ended up with the formal partition of Africa in the last 20 years of the 19th century. So I then wrote my master's paper. I critiqued the coverage, of course, the racist coverage. And I wanted to do something better. I wanted to breathe some life into it. So I contacted the New York Times and I asked if I could be put in touch with reporters. They started sending out to Africa in the 1950s and 1960s. And I think at the time, the librarian, when librarians still existed, told me that maybe it was a better idea to actually go to the New York Times archives and read the correspondences exchanged between the reporters and the editor, the foreign editor here in New York City.
And we should say, you're talking about now, this is early 1990s, right? When you're work. Okay. I just want to be.
Yes, this is actually 1992.
Okay.
So I went to the archives and I don't believe that they knew what those files contained in terms of how horrific some of those correspondence were. And so obviously, this is what a reporter wants to find, right? So to me, it was a great gift. So for example, I found a letter written by Homer Bigart, who was, of course, well-known. He had already won the Pulitzer 2 times before he joined the Times, when he was with the New York Herald Tribune. And he wrote back to Emanuel Friedman, who was the foreign news editor. And of course, I'm paraphrasing. And he's saying, I cannot get enthusiastic about this assignment. And his assignment was to cover decolonization in Africa. He said he wasn't impressed with leaders such as Kwame Nkrumah, who was Ghana's first prime minister after independence from Britain. He said he preferred the primitive bush people because, after all, cannibalism was the best antidote to this population explosion that everybody is complaining about. So then my first impression was, okay, was this like the deranged writings of one reporter, perhaps? So then I went to look at what was published that he wrote from Africa at that time. And there was a perfect correlation between these personal exchanges and what he wrote purportedly as news coverage from Africa. And this was actually promoted and encouraged by the foreign news editor, who in one of his letters to Bigart said, oh, this is just, and I'm of course paraphrasing again, this is just to say hello and to find out how you're doing in the Badlands. I want you to know that by now you're American journalism's expert on African witchcraft, sorcery, and all the other exotic phenomenon indigenous to darkest Africa. Where else can you get this but in the New York Times for a nickel? I believe it was a nickel at that time. And so I completed this paper, and then I was encouraged when it won one of those prizes they give at the end of the semester at Columbia. And also further encouraged when I was approached by Columbia Journalism Review that wanted to publish it. So I thought, okay, this is the kind of breakthrough I wanted, because this is really the way to push back against this narrative, and maybe this will improve the prospects of this getting wide circulation. But it was never published by Columbia Journalism Review, and I suspect that maybe somebody was hesitant as to how some people at the New York Times might react. So I sent it to the Times, and I got a response from Joseph Lelyveld, who was the managing editor at that time. And he conceded that, yes, you found some ugly, crude language during the course of your research. But at that time, I also made a proposal to write an op-ed for the Times so that this part of its history could be addressed and known to the public. But that proposal was not accepted. So to cut the story short, it's been a challenge publishing it for a long time. At one point, I completed it in a book form and self-published. And now in June, last year, I got a publishing contract with Kendall Hunt Publishing Company, and the book was finally published in June of this year.
I just want to step back for people and provide just a little bit of context, because I think in this day and age, it's sort of hard to understand how dominant the New York Times was in setting a narrative. You're talking about the correspondence you're talking about with Bigart is in 1959. There's no internet. There's right. There are, the International Herald Tribune is of course, is overseas at that point, but that's more or less printed by, I think, an extension of the New York Times, or maybe at one point, maybe at that point they hadn't sort of combined yet. But the New York Times, in terms of setting the narrative for a place, that is, well, for really anywhere, frankly, at that point,
Yes.
so dominant. I don't think that we can really fully grasp. If you've grown up, if you're under the age of, I don't know, of like 30 or 40 at this point, like, I don't know if you can fully grasp the what that meant. That was really it. There was no other, everything else, every other picture that you could get about Africa from in this country would have in some way emanated from the New York Times. And
absolutely,
this guy's writing about it with the, was indicative, was certainly consistent with the way that his perspective was on it. And, I don't know.
Yes, absolutely. And to make matters worse, I think the foreign news editor became so accustomed and was actually pleased by this narrative that occasionally they took matters into their own hands. Even after he was foreign news editor for about 16 years, I believe, until 1965. And then afterwards, that same MO actually continued at the Times. So I found a letter from a correspondent who had been based in Nigeria, Lloyd Garrison. He's a descendant of the famous abolitionist, William Lloyd Garrison. And he wrote complaining to the foreign news desk why an incident involving Nigerians dressed in grass leaves had been inserted into his story that he wrote from Nigeria without his knowledge. So he didn't even know about it till he read the published version of his article. And he said, obviously, this is offensive. Africans know what it means when you keep referring to them as tribesmen and tribes. He said, please never use tribesmen. If you insist, then perhaps you should use tribe, but otherwise don't. You wouldn't use that to refer to people in Belgium, for example. So that's what he was saying in his letter. And later on, I got to meet him actually. By that time in the 90s, he was the, I think, director of communication of the Ford Foundation. So he was really elated that my research had revived something that had really bothered him while he was a New York Times correspondent. He's since passed away. Many of the people that I spoke to have passed away now.
It's also fascinating, we should say, that even as late as, or as recently as 92, right? I mean, we're talking 30 some odd years later, there's such fear of the New York Times in the early 90s, the power of it. I mean, one can imagine that you get a better sense of the power of a narrative in defining an entire continent in such a, both offensive, but, sort of just like I don't know, a rudimentary, one-dimensional way. You get a sense of the power of that narrative when you realize just how powerful the New York Times was 30 years later, that nobody would publish your piece. And you went to, and this wasn't just, this wasn't just the Columbia Journalism Review. You went to places, including like Mother Jones magazine, like nobody would do.
Correct. In fact, I was referred to Mother Jones by the editor at the New Yorker magazine at that time, who sent me the typical form letter, the rejection, but on the letter had a handwritten note saying, something like, send this to Mother Jones, they may publish it. And of course, Mother Jones also rejected it. So it was at that point that I said, you mean even the Village Voice won't publish it? So I said to myself, I had a friend actually that worked at the Village Voice. And he said, I like the New York Times. I said, that's not the point. I mean, what is the point of being a journalist if you have to self-censor for certain media institutions and not for others? It means you're not a real journalist now. In fact, that is why I approached the Times and said, let me write an op-ed. This is a part of your history that you need to address. Instead, I think they chose the wrong course to try to ignore it as if this story would eventually just go away. And now, lo and behold, 30 years later, we find ourselves in this national and international conversation over race and the narratives of the past.
Was so much of this, due to this maybe religious adherence to the New York Times, as Sam was saying, as like the bastion of truth? Like a lot of these rejections that you're seeing, one, of course, it's informed by racial undertones and biases, but two, I just would imagine like it's almost like questioning God for some,
Yes.
some of these journalists. Was that a bit of the dynamic you saw?
Yes, I believe so. Because when I asked the editor of the Columbia Journalism Review, I said, so what was the reason for withdrawing the offer to publish? And the editor at the time, I believe it was Michael Hoyt was his name, told me that there was a belief that these things happened a long time ago. I said, well, how do you write about history without going back a long time ago and showing its perhaps some of the continuity today? And I really then got to know that there must have been a fear of the New York Times because I got a copy of the edited version that they edited. It was already in galley form. And you know, back in the day, how they used to do it. And again, I'm paraphrasing, they inserted a passage on my behalf in the introduction saying something like, the New York Times recently allowed me access into its archives. The following essay is in no way an indictment of the New York Times. This is just to show how any media organization can go off course or something like that. So that to me was the confirmation that, well, this was the reason why.
All right, let me just clarify. So the Columbia Journalism Review was inclined to publish this. They went so far as to edit it.
Absolutely.
Including in that edit was a sort of a disclaimer, like this isn't really a criticism.
Exactly.
It's just sort of like more of a criticism of like, boy, the world is a tough place. And
there you go.
And then even then it became too scary for them to publish that.
Absolutely.
Look, just to be clear, is an updated, is expanded out from the Times.
Yes.
But I do think that like, that people can see just sort of how dominant the Times was at that time for creating this narrative, and you know, that's essentially as society grows up, you know, sort of having a certain perception. You know, it's not like we're so full of information that comes from the continent of Africa now that we're like, well, that we no longer have those misperceptions.
Right.
And I should just say one more thing about that New Yorker letter, which I also find fascinating. In that day and age, too, you handwrite on something that has been filed and typed. That handwritten part, there's one carbon copy because we didn't have, you know, I guess by 90s copy machines, but that goes out. There's really no record of that because it's not like scanners proliferated where, you know, where like you could scan that, put that on Twitter. It didn't, it just wasn't, that was just their way of saying like, I'm with you on this, but I don't want anybody to know. And so,
exactly right.
All right. Well, so with that in mind, let's talk about what's happening in Ethiopia, because I think there's a there's just a dearth of information. You know, so just to go back and give us a little bit of history, because I think to understand what's happening with the with Tigray, which is a region within Ethiopia, we have to go back really over the past like a couple of decades to understand where the Tigrayans were within the Ethiopian government. And I mean, it's as we start talking about Eritrea, it's fascinating to me that where Eritrea is in the context of this. But and people should also know Ethiopia is the second most populous country on the continent of Africa. I mean, there's 110 million people, I believe. So some of the history so that people understand the context of what's going on.
Okay, there's a lot of history, so let me see how best to summarize in the time frame we have. So many Americans would know Ethiopia through Emperor Selassie, who was the emperor for a very long time, from 1930 to 1974. I believe he might have been the 80th monarch, because Ethiopia has a long history of monarchies and a long feudal system. So he was ultimately overthrown in 1974 by the military. And out of that coup d'etat, he's believed to have also been suffocated to death in 1975 by the army. And I don't think they even know up to date where his body was buried. So anyway, the junta that took over was led by a Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam. And he was in power until 1991. But at that time, he was meeting a lot of armed resistance from primarily coming from organized, primarily from the Tigray zone, but involved Ethiopians from other parts of the country as well. And it also involved Eritreans, because Eritrea was still a part of Ethiopia at that time, but they wanted their independence. They wanted to secede. And they thought their best chance was to fight for the people that are getting rid of the military regime in Ethiopia. So they fought alongside the TPLF, and they were called the Eritrean People's Liberation Force. So they were in alliance fighting against the military dictatorship, and they ultimately overthrew the dictatorship in 1991. And that's when Eritrea also announced its independence under the president Isaias Afwerki, who has been president since then up to today. And the TPLF, even though they come from Tigray, which makes up only about 7% of the population of 110 million, they became the dominant political players because they had the dominant armed force. So they invited the other regions to also join in this ruling coalition, which was nevertheless still dominated by the TPLF. And that coalition, led by a charismatic prime minister, Meles Zenawi, was pretty much intact until Zenawi died in 2012. So what we're seeing in Ethiopia up today is sort of a power struggle to see who lands on his feet for the longest time since the passing of Meles Zenawi. So after Zenawi, there's been two prime ministers in succession between 2012, when he passed away, in 2018, and the country became increasingly more unstable because the Oromo people, one of the states as well, one of the regions rather, had been protesting that even though we make up the majority population, we've been marginalized when it comes to the power in the government. And that protest gained momentum. It became like a national protest. So the TPLF decided that we need to do something to diffuse this. So they invited Abiy Ahmed, who is Oromo, to become prime minister. And they saw him sort of as a caretaker, prime minister, because they knew elections were upcoming. And they thought, well, he probably will not be the prime minister after the elections. But of course, Abiy had his own ideas, that this is my chance to consolidate myself. And he negotiated the end of that war with Eritrea. Ethiopia and Eritrea had fought in 1998 to 2000, and they never signed a peace treaty. So it was in a stalemate. So he reached out and he went to Eritrea, and they concluded that war. But they never publicized the details of how they resolved this crisis. Now, in retrospect, people are saying that perhaps he was actually making a deal with Afwerki, the president of Eritrea, that at one point I have to neutralize the power of the TPLF and I'm going to need your help. So that pretty much is what has unfolded since. He announced the invasion of Tigray on November 4th, 2020. He said this was an attempt to reel in a rebellious region, because by that time, Tigray had also held regional elections, even though Abiy, as the federal prime minister, had postponed national elections. He said it's because of the COVID pandemic. But in defiance, Tigray held its own elections. So then the prime minister said, well, this is an act of rebellion. And that gave him the motivation to send in the federal army. And also at the same time, Eritrea invaded Tigray from its northern border.
Well, Milton, what is this simply a function of just sheer politics? I mean, where are the resources where do resources come into this? I mean, I know that, without Eritrea, Ethiopia, as far as I can tell, is largely landlocked, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
And my understanding is that the only sort of, well, at least one of the primary mechanisms to ship goods in and out of Ethiopia is through Djibouti. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but
yes, you are.
And so, how does this all play in? I mean, I have to say that, like, I think it was maybe 25 years ago, I was in Ethiopia and was a taxi driver. At that time, there was the war with Eritrea, and
yes.
The taxi driver basically said it was like two bald men fighting over a comb, that there really wasn't that much they were fighting over that was really integral in helping them. Are we still dealing with a situation like that?
Yes, it was a barren piece of land that they fought over with no resources at all, but just happened to be a geographic area on the land, and it led to the deaths of tens of thousands of soldiers on both sides. But yes, at the same time, one of the, and this of course is just talk, because nobody knows what was signed in that deal between Abiy and Afwerki. People believe that they might have reached some sort of accommodation where Ethiopia will have access to Eritrea. And there's even been some talks about perhaps Eritrea joining in the federation with Abiy sharing the leadership of this newly federated country with Afwerki. And many people believe that Afwerki is a very cunning guy, and they believe that it essentially would be like Abiy riding on the back of the tiger, and that Afwerki at the end of the day could end up on top and actually sidelining him. So there's a lot of permutations going on. But as things stand right now, I think the pressure is now on Ethiopia, the federal government, because now Tigray is able to cast itself in this David and Goliath type narrative and see we've withstood the might of the federal army, and we've withstood the might of another country invading us from the rear. And still we are here. Not only are we here, we've actually reversed the situation militarily on the ground, forcing Abiy to belatedly announce a withdrawal, although the Tigrayans are able to display thousands of captured Ethiopian soldiers. So the pressure really is on the federal government right now. He's in a bind. Abiy cannot seem to look like he was defeated militarily. I think his officers would not tolerate that. So that would make his own tenure very precarious. And the same thing goes for Eritrea, the leadership. The guy's been there since 1991. There's a lot of dissent, and his army could become now, rather than the instrument that keeps it in power, it could become the most dangerous force if it's seen that, in fact, they were defeated by Tigray.
So, what is the situation now with? I mean, Ethiopia was, in some respects, my understanding is basically blockading Tigray. And what is the situation now in terms of like people's ability to eat there or get?
It's very dire. I mean, according to the United Nations, as many as 350,000 people face famine. And the numbers could, of course, be higher because an estimated 2 million people were displaced from the land out of a population of about 7 million. People stopped farming. They were not producing. And in fact, the Eritrean soldiers are accused of indiscriminately destroying crops as well, just as a punitive thing. They've been reportedly the most vicious in terms of attacking civilians in this conflict, the Eritreans. And part of it is because there's an element of revenge as well, because when Eritrea lost the war between Ethiopia and Eritrea in 1998 to 2000, most of the soldiers, the most effective fighters in the Ethiopian army came from Tigray. So there's an element of, payback in what they're doing to the civilian population in Tigray.
Are there any resources that are at play here? Like I'm just trying to understand the motivations outside of just
not so much comparable to, let's say, the conflict in Eastern Congo, where you have this rich resource-wise Eastern Congo. So you have all these players. You had Uganda invading, you had Rwanda invading, supported by multinational corporations who were mining resources as the conflict was going on in Eastern Congo, but it's not the similar type narrative in Ethiopia. The only other big issue in Ethiopia, of course, was this big dam, this grand Ethiopian dam that they built, and now they're filling it up. And at that time, it was leading to a conflict with Egypt, because Egypt, of course, is concerned that once the dam is filled, it will affect the flow of the Nile and severely impact Egypt's agricultural production. In fact, the biggest talk before this whole conflict started was, might Egypt and Ethiopia go to war? And that has not receded because the dam has now been filled and Egypt continues to protest. So some people believe that perhaps Egypt was also playing a role in promoting the conflict by encouraging Tigray to take up arms. So that is the other major outside factor playing into this situation.
Is there any prospect for some type of brokered peace, or
I think so. The African Union is taking a much more aggressive position now in insisting for a dialogue. The United States had been insisting on a negotiated outcome as well, and the UN. But I think between November and maybe June, the response was a bit was not as vigorous coming from the United States and the UN, because I think they really did believe Abiy when he said this was going to be a swift operation, and I'm going to be able to rein in this rebellious region, and that would be it. Of course, it didn't turn out that way. When you unleash war, things never turn out the way that people anticipate. This humanitarian disaster has been created. The US could no longer ignore that. And then, of course, once the tide changed militarily on the ground, then of course, this is a whole new ballgame. Clearly, it's clear that this can be no military solution. And I think that's why now we're seeing more aggressive push for a negotiated settlement.
Are there any U.S. interests? I mean, there's. I mean, I would maybe it's a bit of a bank shot with Egypt, but I mean, are there any direct U.S. interests there? I mean, and also where is China? Doesn't China have a huge investment in Ethiopia?
Yes, of course. China is one of the biggest investors now in Ethiopia. China has actually built much of Ethiopia's infrastructure, the bridges, the roads, the massive buildings. Ethiopia, in fact, was a hopeful story out of many unhopeful stories from Africa in the last couple of decades. By Western bourgeois standards, it was doing well. The economy growing at 6 to 7% per year, although we know in a lot of cases these stats are meaningless if it does not translate to the grassroots. But nevertheless, compared to other African countries, doing pretty well. And the US, of course, was not happy that Ethiopia has developed this stronger relationship with China. But hey, if China is going to offer loans and build these infrastructure, why would Ethiopia refuse that? Right. So yes, there was a lot of pressure on the Ethiopians to turn more toward the US rather than China. In fact, as a result, the IMF and World Bank had offered significant financing to Ethiopia last year as a result of that pressure.
And so the U.S. is looking to at least promote some measure of stability and peace, and preferably with Ahmed's government.
Absolutely, preferably with Ahmed's government and with Ahmed on the U.S. Side, of course, away from China, steering Ethiopia away from China with IMF and World Bank loans. Obviously, the war was unanticipated, and that is why I think the U.S. was reluctantly to come out hard against Ahmed initially, Abiy Ahmed. But now, as a result of the humanitarian crisis, it cannot be ignored. So it has to take a much more even-handed approach now in resolving this crisis.
Well, hopefully there'll be some resolution soon, because it sounds like there's hundreds of thousands of lives in the balance.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, Milton Allimadi, the book is Manufacturing Hate: How Africa Was Demonized in the Western Media. We will put a link to that at majority.fm. It's fascinating stuff. Much appreciated. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you. Thank you to both you and Emma.
Thanks.
Be well. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. All right, folks. Going to take a quick break. Come back. We will wrap things up for this first half of the program. All right, folks. That's it for us. If you are watching us on Peacock, we will say not adieu. What is it again?
Au revoir.
Au revoir. Thank you.
I know, but one would think that maybe you just should stop attempting it.
In French.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I don't give up so easy. I'm not going to. That's not.
But you also don't try at all to learn what the right.
It's not like you're doing Duolingo every night.
Exactly. And I have a nice mix of total refusal to give in, and also total refusal to actually sort of like win.
Right.
So that's the
to do what it takes.
Yeah, exactly.
Do what's necessary to win.
Yes. So folks should really check out Manufacturing Hate. It's fascinating, and I cannot state enough how dominant something that the New York Times had decided was the reality for so many decades. But if you're watching us on Peacock, we will say see you tomorrow. And for those of you who are still here, bonne chance.
Good luck.
Yes, good luck.
Good luck. You got to deal with us for the next
Vous
hour and a
avez
half.
bonne chance. You have good luck as we continue.
By the way,
Voulez-vous
as Sam tries to figure out what French he wants to deploy, Milton has a Patreon too, the African History Club podcast that has 99 patrons. So somebody I would have thought was
going to be a number 100.
Yeah, but yeah, he does very good. I mean, he does a lot of great content. Just super knowledgeable guy.
Check that out. We will put a link to that as well in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. Folks, speaking of subscriptions, I have an idea for you that is completely free.
Whoa.
It is our AM Quickie newsletter. You can head over to majority.fm, sign up, scroll down to the bottom of the page, sign up for it. And every morning you will get an email from either Jack or Corey, who are giving you stories that you might want to know for the advance of the day. Stories sometimes that we don't even cover on the show, because there's a lot of news out there. They find stuff that you may be interested in, but you wouldn't necessarily hear. And it is all free. You don't seem terribly impressed by that.
I
Or
didn't
did I
know
just like
if you were
hypnotize you?
done.
Yeah, it was mesmerizing. The idea of all free.
Yeah.
Check it out. Head to majority.fm. And also, you can support this show.
Like the stream, Poggers, Bing Bing,
like the stream, give us a thumbs up, make a comment. YouTube poggers, become a subscriber on Twitch.
Bing was like you doing each action, right?
Yep, bing, bing, bing,
subscribe,
bing.
like, bing.
And you can also support the whole show by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you support the free show, and you get extra content. So there you go. Check it out. Don't forget, Nomi's show on Wednesdays and Fridays, youtube.com/The Nomiki Show. And Matt, what's happening in the Matt Leckian universe of media?
So, as you mentioned, Corey Pine of the AM Quickie, we had him on for a patron-only show for Left Reckoning this weekend. We talked about UFOs. He's a little bit more into the UFO stuff than I am, but we joined together to bash the skeptic community response, which we both think is sort of lazy rehashings of 90s arguments and sort of incurious about what's going on in the sort of deep state. Like, why are we having this discussion about UFOs? But
why are we?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, there are things out there that are being sensed that we don't really know what they are, apparently. It could be, either interstate rivalry. It could be Chinese, for instance, or it could be Navy has something they don't want to tell anyone, or a sort of maybe Blackwater has some new technology and they're buzzing ships and stuff like that.
Right.
Or it could be aliens. So we talk about that, and we also talk about another alien, Peter Thiel, what he's doing with J.D. Vance and the candidates he's supporting, as well as should we be more concerned about right-wingers being entrapped by the police or coordinating with them? So we talk about a wide range of topics. That's patreon.com/leftreckoning to get that conversation.
Sounds really good. Interesting.
It's really good, and also Corey has a big bushy beard now. That kind of I thought like my pandemic hirsuteness was
say again.
Well, hirsute about hairiness, right?
Okay.
I thought my pandemic hairiness was unchallenged, but Corey's got a big bushy beard that looks like the.
Oh, just because your hair's long now?
Yeah, I got a really long hair, and I'm also doing more of. Well, I guess I was doing the mustache before, but
yeah, you were rocking the mustache.
I think
before.
of hairiness in terms of facial hair and other areas, not really like.
I also have hairy
length.
legs, so.
You've let your hair. You've let your.
Well, no, those have always been hairy. That's not a.
This is all fun half stuff.
Yeah.
I can't even believe we're giving away this content for free.
He's got hairy legs.
Folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it to my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Denner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Denner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense.
See white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males.
Psych. Fuck them. Snowflake says what? What? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. back. And the Africans are black, 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 black African. And the alpha males are black, 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 black. And the Africans are back, 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 back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100.
Can't knock the hustle.
Come on, fuck them, fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back, back. Africans are black, black. Alpha males are black, black. Africans are back, back.
Come on. Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I guess we aren't back. I'm back. And oh, look who's, now we are back. There we go.
Am I on camera?
Emma decided to take a little jog.
Yeah, well, you know,
That's all right.
I gotta get my steps in.
Get those 500 steps to the commissary and back.
Right. Well, I know, and I have to wear that big key around my neck. The duplicate.
We're going to. Would you just say there was still watching what's going on with the Line 3 protests, and this is another oil pipeline crossing the Mississippi River, and there have been attempts at the end of last month to essentially prevent it being built. And there was two women who were just sentenced to prison, or just about to be. I did an interview about this for the Peacock show over the Dakota Access Pipeline, and what they were doing is they were going basically like sabotaging it being built, just trying to increase the expense of building it, and essentially you've got people, Walz, the governor in Minnesota, approved the building of the pipeline, and I think this was fairly recently. And basically, you've got a group of folks, water protectors, indigenous folks, who are, trying to essentially protect our waterways. You'll remember there was a huge spill by Colonial. They made it into news because they were like cyber hacked, right? Cyber attacked. But the real story was completely, was unrelated, I believe, to this. But sometime around this time last year, there were a couple of, I think, kids who were riding their mountain bikes in the woods, and they came upon this area where there was oil bubbling up from the ground. And a Colonial pipeline, which is the biggest one on the East Coast, had sprung a leak. And the terrifying thing about this is Colonial did not know. And for there to be enough oil that it's actually bubbling up through the ground, and these things are built, are buried, I don't know how many feet down, 6 feet, more maybe. The idea that there's so much oil that has leaked at that point that it's bubbling up, and it is not picked up by the supposed sensors that are telling you that there's leaks. You understand the implications of that if that pipeline is, I don't know, in the Mississippi. And you can go and look over the course of the past year as Colonial slowly either reveals or understands the size of this leak. It's massive. It was, I mean, there was so much oil that was in the ground. And had that been, I mean, obviously it's going to have detrimental effects for all sorts of the environment around there. But had it gone through the Mississippi, I mean, the devastation would have been amazing.
Yeah. And we should say for the Line 3 protests too, the tactics used by police are escalating. There hasn't been a lot of reporting on this, but of course Democracy Now! Is having the activists on to say their piece in the traditionally like excellent way Democracy Now! Does some of this stuff. But it's very reminiscent of Standing Rock. Maybe not in terms of just the scale and the size, but I can't speak firsthand, but it seems like there have been multiple water protectors arrested, and police usage of excessive force in a variety of ways, tear gas, rubber bullets, etc. So, and plus this is also indigenous Americans who are leading the charge here, much like in with the Dakota Access Pipeline. So it's crucial that we show our support.
I would recommend people get familiar with the concept of jury nullification when it comes to people arrested for things like this, which is where you basically decide that you don't want to apply the law even despite evidence on certain cases. I think jury nullification is a concept that we should get more and more people talking about.
Where people get on the jury and then they decide they...
Yeah, I mean, like, for instance, like, always... Like, I got jury duty recently. We were talking about this before the show, and I'm actually excited to go. And if it's going to be, like, sort of a drugs charge or something like that, I'll just invoke jury nullification. And... I
mean, when they question you, where does that happen?
They have no idea what they're in for with you.
It's like when you're coming to a verdict, you can just say, and, like, the defense lawyers can't pitch this, say, hey, regardless of the evidence, you should just say he's not guilty. But as a juror, you can do that. Say, I don't believe in this law, and I'm just going to vote not guilty.
I would imagine they would question you that before you get up there.
Well, I'm not going to mention it before I...
Well, but if they ask you and you lie, you may have a problem.
Well, maybe.
The best answer to that is like, I'm thinking about that.
Yeah.
Or you say it at the end of the trial, like, you know, I didn't even know what that was until, like, that whole concept, until they brought it up at the question. So, you know, up until that moment. But then I started to think about it, and I'm like, hey, wait a sec.
And you know what? All of this is on camera now, so...
Whoops.
Could be used by the defense or the prosecution, whichever way, in order to talk about, yeah.
All right, let's get into, we're going to get to IMs and phone in just a moment. We should just say, Fierce Deity 73, any reason the Bullprog Fun half intro has been taken out of the rotation? And folks, I will say, like, I just asked Matt this, and he's like, oh yeah, no, I forgot. Like, just like, that is not a criticism, Matt. It's just like, a lot of times people just don't understand the power of just like habit. In the context of everything.
It's producerial laziness. It's not loaded on. It's not loaded onto this new computer yet. But we'll bring it back tomorrow.
Right, and like the Crowder thing was so.
Speaking of producerial, so much for the mystery surrounding that. It's one of those things where those hot buttons really need to hit when the joke is there.
Right. That's the function of the soundboard.
Yeah. The old, like, say something and then wait 7-8 seconds before. That doesn't work as well.
Doesn't.
Folks, we again, the dynamic in terms of this infrastructure bill is pretty fascinating. The bipartisan bill is essentially, for people on the left, a somewhat, I guess, maybe necessary evil, insofar as, like, if this is what it takes to get the 50 members of the Democratic caucus to vote for the reconciliation bill, then fine. Now, it remains to be seen what Kirsten Sinema is going to do.
It's also not as evil as it could have been. The privatization.
Oh, that stuff is gone. I mean, this bill is
significantly. It's fine.
This bill is more or less, at least as we know it now, and there may be changes, but as far as we know now, is actually like a decent but insufficient, significantly insufficient bill. It does have some problems in that it supposedly, although I imagine I've been told by people who cover these things, that they'll be able to work around it, that it has that it caps some of the expenditures on some of these things, like let's say broadband or something like that, but they'll figure out another way of getting that in there in the reconciliation bill. That remains to be seen. But largely it's like a insufficient, but no problem. For the right, it is like they're voting for baby killing. And here is Maria Bartiromo basically teeing up the Trump campaign for 2024 by saying, like, he's just going to get out there like, I'm not making any compromises like the evil Biden bill or whatever they're going to call it. Biden's infrastructure. Here is Maria Bartiromo.
Well, wrong. Let's look at what's in the bill. First of all, let me ask you, is there any money in this bill?
For 1 second. This is North Dakota Senator Kevin Cramer.
The lone representative, in fact.
Is he? Oh, he's just congressman?
Oh, wait, no, now he's a senator.
He's a senator.
He used to be congressperson.
Yep.
You're right.
There he is.
Well, wrong. Let's look at what's in the bill. First of all, let me ask you, is there any money in this bill that goes to the border? Is there any acknowledgement from the Biden administration that we're in a border crisis and he needs to address it? Any money here in the border? Because I see resilience and water storage, environmental remediation, energy department, power infrastructure, electric vehicles, nuclear companies, a lot of beginnings to the Green New Deal.
Well, first of all, cybersecurity and resiliency of the grid is not exclusive to the Green New Deal. I think we've all experienced the problems with a lack of resiliency to our energy infrastructure. I mean, the Colonial Pipeline cyber attack was a pretty good example of that. Now, are there some things that Democrats like? For sure. Are there some things missing that we would love? Of course there are. But this is a 50-50 Senate. Democrats have a majority in the House and the White House. So you're going to have to take some of those things to get all the other really good things. And all of those other things that you've referenced aren't, again, exclusively democratic principles. There are some other things some of those things that contribute to the overall infrastructure of our country. And this is all hard infrastructure, Maria. You might argue with some of it. I don't like the electric vehicle charging stations, for example. If I was king, I wouldn't support that. But fortunately, our founders gave us something other than a king.
Well, you're not a king. None of the Republicans are king, but it certainly seems like the Democrats act like kings. In addition to all of that money beginning a Green New Deal, it also dictates rules in areas that have traditionally been managed by local authorities, like drinking water, even as it muscles in on private sector enterprises like broadband. So once again, we see the Democrats taking power away from the governors and putting it on the federal level. Is that fair?
It is not fair. It may be fair in a couple of areas, regards to broadband, for example, or water, for example. But here's one thing that I fought really hard for: permitting reforms.
I can't even believe this is just unbelievable.
Because it sounds like the Green New Deal.
Well, but it's not. I mean, even that is just sort of like where? What are they arguing here? Right? Like she's going governors really want control of the pipe. Like we know how well that worked out in Michigan, for instance. We only poisoned thousands of children. We want governors to have the ability to poison hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, this guy's out there talking about we don't want charging stations for electric vehicles. It's like in 1993. You know, that's what Rush Limbaugh used to talk about the Priuses. And they come on the highway and they can't go very fast and they're going to get run over by my SUV. I mean, that's the way he would do it. And it's like the idea that this is sort of they're arguing over nothing. And then on top of that, there's no even talking points here. It is honestly just like the most sort of anemic. It is really just sort of like you're not Donald Trump. I mean, it's just bizarre to me. There's no policy argument going on, and there's no politics argument going on.
It's bizarre too, because Kramer, it's not like he has to worry, from what I understand, about a Democratic challenger or whatever whenever he's
in North Dakota.
And North Dakota is about as Trumpy as you get. So like, it's bizarre. I'm almost surprised that he's doing this.
Well, he's
like going on the news.
And like, yeah,
or
like,
supporting it from supporting the bipartisan bill.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, no, the reason why he's supporting the bipartisan bill is because
it benefits him.
Right.
Probably.
They want highway funds.
It's a popular bill. It's a popular bill, and like we can talk about how much it appeals to the Trump base, but that's not gonna, I think, be remembered or stick in people's minds when there's like a significant infrastructure improvement in rural areas of North Dakota. Part of probably why he's supporting this is because it is a rural state, and some of the things that are included, as he says, include like broadband and internet infrastructure. Like these, this
is all a pork bill. I mean, essentially, it's desperately needed, and maybe it's a wrong definition of pork, but everybody's going to be bringing home something.
And it helps the industry in his state too,
of course.
And it helps his donors. So it's like people like him and Bill Cassidy have to straddle this line where they are giving lip service to the bizarre cultural elements like Green New Deal, like has AOC stink all over it. And like, oh, critical race theory, there's equality in this bill. Like that sounds like we like black people somewhat. They have to pretend like they're giving credence to those thoughts when in reality they're like, well, I want to do some government. I don't want to just be, a Trump speech crystallized.
Here is Bartiromo is not satisfied. She's like, where is the racism in this? It's not enough. It's not enough that Joe Biden's still operating under Title 42. It's not enough that we still have no new DACA recipients at the moment. Where is the overt racism in this bill, Senator? I don't see it. This is clip number 3.
Now, with regard to the southern border, obviously we're not going to get Democrats to agree to a bill that builds a wall. I think that would be pretty cool, but why not?
Why not? Why not just work for the American people? We've got a wide open border. We've got 6,000 people coming across the border every single day, 210,000 apprehended in the month of July. Why not demand that they fix the border before anything else? And by the way,
6,000 people coming across the border every day. Imagine how Bartiromo would feel if like 100,000 were getting infected by COVID every day. Sorry, we already are there.
Well, it doesn't even matter. Probably the Democrats who helped craft this bipartisan bill rightly understand that no matter what Biden does, no matter how draconian he is, no matter how he only closed 2 of the ICE contracted facilities or ended those contracts and maintained a great majority of them from the Trump era, and how he since February has doubled detentions of migrants crossing the border, it literally doesn't matter if he put on a red MAGA hat and said, I'm going to build a wall. It wouldn't matter. They are going to criticize him for being soft on the border anyway, and then you have DeSantis in Florida blaming his own failures on the border, which is just a fiction. Right. They repeat the same lie until it feels true, and that's like the fact that she can get herself worked up so much over that lie. That fascinates me too, in terms of a psychology perspective. Does she even identify it as not a truth anymore, or is she just so deep in it? Like,
a good question. That is actually a question.
Like, work on behalf of the American people. That's what he thinks he's doing, as Matt pointed out, right? This is actually going to help people in his state. That's part of it.
They need highways.
Should we play one more of this?
I think so.
All right, let's do this. I love to watch Kramer just sort of be fuddled by here. Here is Kevin Kramer basically trying to sort of just like hint at maybe he just feels safe, but he is about to say some sacrilege. I'm surprised.
This is one doozy of an interview. We got 3 separate clips.
I'm surprised they didn't bleep this out on Fox News. Here
wow.
And let me just end this question with President Trump's commentary on it, because President Trump also had a statement on.
I should just inform everybody, Donald Trump is no longer president in the rest of the world outside of where Maria Bartiromo is. But how many times do you think they referred to just President Obama? Probably not many times.
Probably.
Go ahead. Or President Clinton.
Barry.
President Carter. Go ahead.
Because President Trump also had a statement on the infrastructure package, and he says Joe Biden's infrastructure bill is a disgrace. It will be used against the Republican Party in the upcoming elections in 2022 and 2024. It will be very hard for me to endorse anyone foolish enough to vote in favor of this deal. And you say?
Well, he didn't give one reason why it's a bad deal, other than it's Joe Biden's. And I understand that, and I understand his frustration, and he's obviously got influence and has a legitimate opinion. But the fact of the matter is the American public, including the vast majority of Republicans, are very supportive of this. Everybody from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Business Roundtable to my local convenience stores and labor unions support this bill. There's some nearly 200 organizations that have come out in support of this bill. We need roads and bridges. We're falling behind our competitors, particularly China, with regard to transportation infrastructure. It is what moves goods and services around the world. So I think he's wrong on
recognize
this
there's a lot of support for this on both sides. Definitely a lot of support in this. I get that.
Yeah, well, as soon as he said China, it softened her a little.
I was going to say, like, I'm surprised he didn't lead with that. Like, we're in a race against China.
Yeah. Might have altered the tone of the interview, but I love how Trump's quote just does all of her work for her. It's right. That's all she needs.
But that is I mean, this is the
she's a proxy.
This is going to be the dynamic in the in 2024, and those people who are going to support this bill are just hoping that people won't notice. But Trump, of course, is going to ride this. I'm telling you, he's going to call it the Biden infrastructure bill, and this is what's going to be fascinating. They're going to, if the reconciliation bill, both bills pass, Trump is going to take the stuff from the reconciliation bill and attribute it to the vote that the Republicans in the Senate and, if any, in the House do for the bipartisan bill. And I mean, it's going to be a fascinating dynamic when you start to get into 2022 and Donald Trump is blaming the Republicans for, universal pre-K. Now, if the Republicans were not so demented, they'd say, yeah, well, it's partly my response, but they won't be able to vote for it. This dynamic, we're just getting a preview of it. I mean, because this is where he's going to go. They're going to talk about the infrastructure bill was a Biden bill, and that's it. No, I don't. I was going to say I feel bad for Kramer, but not quite. I really don't. I really don't. He's a great guy and all this, but he didn't give a reason as to why I shouldn't vote for it.
I mean, he was fully loyal to Trump every second he was in office. I guess he just doesn't want to call him President Trump anymore.
Nerd Cheetah. A few days ago, I saw Reverend Al woke scolding unnamed trust fund progressives with Scarborough. Citing himself and the true heroes of yesteryear, now nestled comfortably at the establishment breast, he seemed truly offended that this generation might want a better world, even more that today's progressives willingly point out those with a chokehold on change, much like those of Sharpton's age once did. Of course, Al picked the right audience for his tin ear bitching. Scarborough was all about it, and the only thing he missed was Donnie Deutschbag's input. You say you're anxious about COVID. Imagine an elementary teacher as we approach the beginning of the school year with policymakers desperate not to draw the ire of the donor class, pretending it's all about individual choice and responsibility. I believe me, it is. I feel for teachers. It's going to be. We're going to have a better sense, but I don't know what it's going to be. I'm afraid that we're going to have a real problem, and particularly if you're in a red state. That's interesting. We got this. There's a report out there, and I've seen this now. It was just covered, I guess, by the Miami Herald. put up this clip. We got an email from a listener who is a teacher in Florida. And DeSantis is so terrified about what's going on with COVID. They are sending now $1,000 bonuses to Florida's teachers, like school staff principals anyways. I don't know if they're doing full school staff, and first responders. And the big sort of concession was it's not going to have the governor's logo on there. Can we put up these pictures, Brad? Let's see the first one. What's interesting is, so this is actually coming from the $400 million in COVID relief. And they're using that to offer bonuses to teachers, principals, police, firefighters, pandemics, other first responders. DeSantis, of course, trying to make it look like he's putting out that money. Here, put this up. Do we have it? Okay. All right. So, and this is interesting. Oh, put up the other one first. Put up the other ones first, because they're trying to make it like, it's just like a, hey, great job, guys. We're all done. Don't worry about a thing. Here, put up that one. Okay. So, no, the other one. No. All right. Well, there's a check for $1,000. I want that, the other letter, the first page letter. Sorry. And there's just sort of like disclaimer that they include in it that's not on the letterhead. So here's the one on the letterhead, and pop that up there. Okay, this past year has came with challenges that required an extraordinary level of determination and perseverance. Tens of millions of students throughout the country were denied the opportunity to attend school in person. Florida put students and families first. Which made because so many other people were like, we're not going to put our families and kids first. We're putting our interest in not having a functioning society first.
Well, liberals want to kill the children and the abortions and such.
Made a huge difference for millions of students and families throughout the state. This would not have been possible without your best efforts. Do you see the word COVID in there? And DeSantis writes a letter, does not use the word COVID or pandemic.
Or coronavirus.
Nothing. It's just sort of like, hey, some of these libs were shutting down their schools, but you didn't. So here's $1,000 bonus. Oh, and incidentally, here's our this is, put up the next one, the next letter. This is like the functional equivalent of that thing at the end of ads where they speed up the guy talking. None of this may be used, but if it becomes going to get that type of thing like this. Well, here, put up that letter, Bradley. Here it is. And then there's the little bit of a caveat at the end here, which says this payment is a one-time payment to reimburse for reasonable and necessary personnel, family, and living and funeral expenses incurred as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. This could include the unreimbursed costs of home equipment and services, utilities, protective equipment, and cleaning supplies for personal use, childcare and educational materials, tutoring, health, wellness, and medical expenses not covered by insurance, costs of caring for and supporting vulnerable family members, and funeral costs. This payment is considered qualified disaster relief payment under Section 139 of the Internal Revenue Code. Qualified disaster relief payments under 139 are generally not includable in gross income for tax purposes and are not reportable as income on a federal income tax return. There may be tax implications depending on your individual circumstance. You should consult your tax advisor, of course, for more information. So,
please consult your doctor.
Yeah, and if you sprinkle like lime juice on it, a hidden writing says, "Don't ask for any more. Anything else?"
Exactly. Thank God we made it throughout the whole political thing that was going on before. And then please see addendum for the actual reality of what's going on. Unbelievable. Rampaging Toaster. Today I was shocked to learn about the business plot, a 1933 conspiracy by wealthy businessmen to overthrow FDR and install a dictator. You didn't know this with Smedley Butler?
And a Bush, if memory serves.
Oh, really?
Is that right?
There was
not Prescott.
Like the advanced, like older guy.
Bowser with Schnauzer, Sam and Emma. Between the two of you, which one is chocolate? Which one is peanut butter? All right. Don't know how to respond to that. Emma knows corn. I feel like I'm being sacrificed going back to teach college in a tiny classroom in just a few weeks. It feels like the administration is burnt out, pretending to care and take precautions, so they're just acting like there are no concerns. I want to recommend a collection of short stories called Love After the End, a collection of speculative fiction by queer indigenous writers. It's really great writing, and it's also incredible to be pushed to consider climate catastrophe from a framework that posits apocalypse as plural, ongoing, survivable, etc., without being blind to the dangers we're facing. Interesting.
It sounds good.
Love After the End. Shore Wrap. Been a while since I've been able to IM the show, so after getting my first post-pandemic job back in May, I've noticed that there's a lot of people who aren't vaccinated, even the ones who aren't crazy-ass conservatives, believe that the vaccines aren't that effective or effective enough to offset the complications that the vaccine could give you. It's been like herding cats to explain to them how wrong that thinking is.
I also just wonder, like the system, we always talk about access to healthcare, but I think, like, I got the vaccine, but fairly confident that I could say, like, hey, I'm out sick today. People that don't have jobs, like, that becomes a much bigger hurdle, I think.
Right.
Yeah. No, I think that's true.
And that's also, I think, why you see that massive discrepancy, and like the 50% fully vaxxed number really hasn't moved.
Yeah.
And we hit 70% with one shot, but we're having issues. And now, you know, I know that's so anecdotal, but based on the person that wrote in and said that they went to their pharmacy just to get a booster shot because they knew, like, maybe that's tilting some of it
We
too.
don't know how many of those people are. That's a good point. Juicy. I finally watched pilot season recently, and I'm convinced that Michael Scott from The Office was copied from you and John Benjamin's characters. I will tell you this, that Who's the Caboose, which was the prequel, well, it was, pilot season was a sequel to Who's the Caboose, was done about 4, 5, 6 years before the British Office. I did see the British Office somewhere, I think just before we shot, or just after we shot pilot season in 2003. Maybe that was. I think the British Office was out by then. But there are definitely some similarities. But I don't think so. Let's go to the phones, shall we? Calling from a 701 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 701? 701, hang in there. 701.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can now. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Riley from North Dakota.
Riley from North Dakota. What's going on, Riley?
I would just like to appreciate all the Kramer slander earlier in the show. Those 3 clips were an absolute treat.
Well, there you go. He's a rhino. Rhino.
I would also like to trigger or issue a trigger warning for the rest of the audience. I will be talking about Ted Cruz.
Okay.
Thank you for being conscientious.
So anyone who needs to step away, do that now.
I just thought about that white thing in his mouth, but continue.
I remember a while back on the show, you were talking about the feverishness of the conservatives to push for smaller elections like school boards. And I actually got an email in my school email because I was in a bunch of politics clubs in my freshman year. And I got an email about the GOP literally training people how to run for like school board elections.
Interesting.
And the Leadership Institute is the name of the organization, and they had some stream on with Ted Cruz today about the whole school board thing, and it was basically what felt like repeat Cold War propaganda, because he equates critical race theory with Marxism without ever addressing Marxism. He just assumes, communism bad, essentially.
I mean, look, this is, they know what they're doing. They just have a couple of words that they think test poorly, and they just use them as some type of catch-all for anything that they don't like. That's it. I mean, that's just basically their strategy. And They may not run out of words. I mean, it used to be communist. The socialist used to be. They used to use Remember, I mean, it was Barack Obama is the Kenyan socialist, but they don't use that word anymore because it actually tests well, and so they switched to Marxism. That's the more, I don't know, darker, like the more like just potentially more cryptic and
it does sound more infamous potentially, yeah. But it just all feels the same when they just are so shameless in the way that they instantly link back to Marx, even though it's only Marxian in the way that it looks at, haves and have-nots, essentially.
Right.
And not actual economic basis
but
whatsoever.
Also what they call critical race theory is also not critical race theory.
It's largely unimportant.
Also true. Though the praxis part of it is making its way. I just, a lot of it just seems fear-mongery and
of course
the same as the other previous Red Scares. It almost feels like it's not like a Red Scare like communism, but it just feels sort of similar in the sense that they're just person's critical race theory, that person, you know what I mean?
Yeah, you just the way you deal with that is you just replace those words with bad, and then you've got what they're doing. Appreciate the call.
Yep.
Calling from an 831 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, are you receiving my signal?
I am, barely. You got to speak up a little bit.
Got a low phone.
All right, give me one moment.
I'm curious as to why you refer to it as a signal as opposed to the phone call.
Yes, it's because I'm coming from a very distant galaxy. Is that any better?
No, actually, that's worse. It sounds like you went further away from the planet that we're talking about.
How about now?
Yeah, that's much better.
Way better.
Perfect. This is Gorflax Blorfulmax from the Vega system, and I'm an alien rights activist.
Okay.
I'd like to talk to you for a little bit about a misconception that lots of people have about aliens. Lots of people say that getting probed is one of the worst things that can happen, but we find that generally humans actually quite enjoy being probed. That after they get probed, they end up hanging out in the area that we've abducted them from and generally try to get abducted again.
I mean, yeah, I know a lot of people who actually enjoy that.
I'm sorry, that didn't come out as funny as I thought it would. I actually have a normal question. Yeah. A normal question I'd like to talk about.
Yeah, let's go with that.
I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was pretty good. Blurred.
Thanks. Yeah. So I know you folks focus mostly on worker issues, but I'd like to bring up something that's affected me as a very small business owner. I basically build and sell electronics by myself, and something that I haven't heard pretty much anybody talk about is how pretty much all of the Trump tariffs are back or have never been, they're still around. Like, I end up buying circuit boards from China, and usually I have to pay up to a quarter in tariffs on it, which for someone like me is extremely prohibitive to my business. I know that there's still a lot of the farming tariffs are still in place, and I was watching a graphic recently that was showing sort of like the history of all of the largest exporters. You can see that the United States is on top pretty much from the 40s up until roughly 2016, when China is suddenly on top and the United States just plummets. And so I don't know. I'm not sure if this is necessarily your wheelhouse, but I think that
I mean, the supposed trade war with China that he launched simply it just failed. Like, there's no his attempt to put tariffs on these things and create a U.S. industry for these things. No, didn't happen.
Right. The problem is that all of the tariffs are still there, and Biden, nobody's really like, hey, when are we going to end these tariffs? Because it's clearly a failure. Or when are we going to provide incentives besides just
It's also hard to know right now, too, it seems to me, like how much, like COVID and supply chain stuff is, how much is that contributing to like the expense that you're paying? But yeah.
No, it's literally like something shows up in customs and they go like, you have 5 days to give us all of this money or else we're sending it back.
Well, you're not paying it.
The supply chain stuff is
You're not paying it. The Chinese government is.
No, I'm paying it.
No, the Chinese.
It'd be really
government.
nice if they did.
No,
yeah.
The Chinese government's paying it.
Wait, are you Chinese?
The Chinese government's paying it. You're not paying it.
Really?
The Chinese government's doing it.
Okay.
I'm now. It's my turn to make a.
Okay, I understand.
Plans.
I understand. I'm slow today. I'll do my impressions later on.
Yeah,
next time.
That's interesting. I have not read much about that, and I wonder. I wonder if that's I don't know why we haven't heard.
That's
much
what I'm saying. I haven't heard anyone talking about it, and it's just odd, because it's definitely still affecting people, especially with small businesses like mine. I've done some research, and apparently you can get the tariffs refunded if you pay a lawyer to go to court for you. So my guess is that these larger companies just have their in-house lawyer or, hire a firm to go and get rid of these tariffs. And so it's just people like me who can't afford a lawyer.
Actually, maybe I'll shoot an email to like Stoller, because this sounds like what that sounds like to me with that type of provision, it sounds like these are monopolistic practices, right? Because you want like it is for those people who already have, for the wealthy corporations, they essentially, this is just a bar to competition, right? Because that way they get to price you out of it, and you can't compete in those type of things. I'll look into it. It's an interesting question. Appreciate the call.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I forgive you for that that thing that started at the beginning.
There's no forgiveness needed. It was
okay. I just we got a lot
about butt probes today.
A little bit out there.
We got well, it's not necessarily just butt. I mean, who knows? Mouth, it could be any type of orifice.
Well, Jesus Christ.
I'm just saying.
I mean, praise Xenu.
I don't know what that means.
Well,
oh wait, praise
Didn't you
Xenu?
work in Hollywood?
I met Lucy Lawless at a is it no?
It's the god of Scientology.
Oh, I'm thinking of Xena.
Xena, warrior princess.
Yes.
Wait,
who would win in a
what
fight,
did you just
Xena
say?
or Xenu?
I didn't say it. Bradley did.
I know, but who did you say you met?
Lucy, what's it?
Lou?
Lucy Lawless.
Oh, I don't know what this is.
Wasn't she the name of that?
Yeah, that's Xena Warrior Princess.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
that's what I thought you were
I don't
talking
know.
about. I don't know about Xenu. All right, folks. Let's talk about Senator Rick Scott, who explains to Brett Baer.
Speaking of aliens.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Who explains to Brett Baer why the deficit that grew under Trump was not an issue, but the one that exists under Biden could be or is. I mean, well, let's play this clip because this is sort of fascinating as to like how. Play this clip.
Senator, you're talking a lot about the deficit and debt. A number of Republicans are, but it wasn't that way under the Trump administration. In fact, if you look at the numbers, the debt went up at the end of fiscal 2020, $26.9 trillion. The Trump administration and Republicans added $6.7 trillion to the debt. That was since President Obama's last budget, 33% increase. Understanding COVID had a big role in that, but there's not a great track record for Republicans recently to tout themselves as deficit debt hawks, and now to be doing it here.
Oh, I did. I paid off. I walked in as governor of Florida in 2011 with a $4 billion budget deficit, a state that had increased its debt every year by over $1 billion. And I, in 8 years, working with the legislature, growing our economy, we paid off a third of state debt. Since I've been up here, I've been talking about the debt, how excessive spending causes your family and the poorest families the most money. It's causing inflation. It's causing ridiculous inflation right now.
You're kind of a lone voice, aren't you? Or one of them.
Oh, no. We had a caucus meeting where we said we're not going to raise the debt ceiling without, all Republican senators said, we will not raise the debt ceiling without structural change.
But my point
That's
is,
what we
that
all
you
agreed to
did
do.
under the Trump administration with no strings attached.
I've been up here 2 years, Brett. I am working my tail off. I'm fed up with a government that can't live within their means. Every family in this country has got to figure out how to live within their means. I grew up in a very poor family. My mom had to figure out how to put food on the table without borrowing money. There was nobody that's just going to go throw money at her. So we all have to do it in our personal lives. We have to do it as government. You can do it. Watch how you spend the money. Like on this bill, do it responsibly. Do roads, bridges, airports, and seaports. Don't borrow money.
Well, maybe we should make it possible for your mother not to have to worry about that in the future. But B, of course, states are different than the federal government. But what's fascinating about this is that this sounds so anachronistic that even Brett Baier has to bring it up. Like it would be just awkward for him to not even mention, like, this seems to be coming out of nowhere.
Well, they're coming from it from a still like a deficit debt hawkery place.
But my point is that this, I mean, I understand that, but my point is, like, the talking point itself has, like, lost all salience because
you see this with Chris Wallace too. Like, Baier is more respectable there, so they're they're going to toe that line.
But you never hear them saying anymore. It's like it's so, and it is so. They put it away. It's like they had a cast on their leg for like 4 years, and when they take it off, you just see like their calves have just shriveled up. And they can't really walk on it without like a limp. That's basically what it is. And it doesn't have any impact. So they're not going to raise the debt ceiling. And there was a time where this was like a huge thing during the Obama administration. They were like paying it, like, pretending like it was going to be big. And now I think what's going to happen is Democrats are going to put it in the reconciliation bill and nobody's going to care.
Well, They've milked that talking point to excess. It's just dried and shriveled up now because I
think it's the opposite. That they didn't use that. They forgot about it for so long that it dried and shriveled up.
I just think that the media, even to the Chris Wallace's and Brett Baier's, they can't stand the tax cuts and what it added to the debt and deficit, and like still maintain some semblance of journalistic integrity and not talk to Rick Scott about that.
It's possible. I think it's embarrassing to them. They're just like, we got to pretend.
Yeah, I mean, but okay. And then the other thing about Rick Scott lecturing people about fiscal responsibility, wasn't he the guy that oversaw massive Medicare fraud when he led that hospital?
I think, to be fair, it was Medicaid.
Oh, I apologize.
He took the fifth. I think it was like 43 times.
He took like hundreds of millions of dollars in some sort of parachute on his way out. But like for him, that's him living within his means, I guess.
There you go.
Yeah.
Also, he has been touting the Trump tax cuts even as recently as last December. So.
Well.
But he wasn't there to vote for it, so you can't hold him to that.
But that's the thing, is like, if I'm going to have any kind of conversation about national debt, which I'm very not inclined to do,
right,
it starts with taxing rich people. That's who's going to pay for it. I know where a lot of money is.
A lot of money's in his pocket in that multi-$100 million of stock options that he ran out the door with after committing fraud at his previous job.
What are you going to do? I appreciate that. Quick phone call. Come from 509 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. It's Ronald Reagan.
Oh, Ronald Reagan.
Oh, my partner in crime. What's up, Ronald Reagan?
Hey, Emma. How are you?
I'm okay. Are you calling to give Sam a little kick in the ass here?
Well, I mean, he committed to September 3rd, and then kind of, I don't know. It sounded a little like he was on a little shaky ground there on Friday. So I don't know.
It's like the Arizona audit.
I wanted to circle back to that real quick. Can we get like a real hard? Can we get a hard commit to September 3rd, or where are we on that exactly?
Sam.
I need to check my schedule. It depends on how tan I get.
I mean, you work like 4 days a week. It shouldn't be that hard to just see whether or not you can wear a tank top that day.
Well,
you're living
you're
living that European dream, 3 day work week, or whatever, right?
It is true that I jet to Cannes on Wednesday nights, and I'm back by Friday morning.
And notably,
Speaking of-
that doesn't apply to the workers.
Yep, that's
Here.
true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Typical.
That's actually a perfect segue into my second comment. You had the animator of Steven Crowder's Nightmare on. He said that he has to render overnight because he's not working with the supercomputer. I'm calling on you as a PMC to personally buy him a supercomputer.
I gotta know. It actually occurred to me, like, I wonder how much of a supercomputer you need.
Well, okay. Or in the alternative, I feel like we should crowdsource it because, he should be churning these out much more quickly.
I mean, there's something. I think there's an argument for that.
What could it cost? What could a supercomputer cost? It can't cost more than what, $5,000?
I don't know. I don't even know what constitutes a supercomputer.
I mean, $5,000 would get you a really nice computer.
I feel like at $5,000, you could actually probably have computing power to basically launch like World War III or something.
But we could crowdsource that in an afternoon. I mean, you specifically because of, because it's you. You're famous. You got celebrity friends and stuff.
Maybe we'll do that on the Sun's Out, Guns Out. We roll that in together.
Call up Bradley Cooper.
To get
a supercomputer for Eamon.
Yeah. Okay. So that's my first thought. My second thought. I've been listening to a lot of Tim Pool.
Yeah, of course.
And Tim Pool is like. Do you ever have one of those dreams where like all of a sudden you're just like a biology professor, and you have a lecture in 5 minutes?
No.
And mine is that I'm playing in like the U.S. Open. Like I'm a tennis player.
Okay.
The U.S. Open tennis. Anyways.
Delusions of grandeur.
And like I don't play tennis at all. But then I go out there and I just sort of start swinging around and like it seems to be working.
Okay.
That's what Tim Pool does, but every day for his job. I listened to his takes on Cuba, and it's also sort of like one of those blot tests because he'll take both sides of everything. So he says in his Cuba video that he's not really about that intervention stuff, but that also we could, if we did intervene, like we could take care of it really quickly. He's confident that it wouldn't be a long, protracted thing.
I don't even know what we would take care of in that situation.
Well, go in and do a quick regime change. But then he switches back to saying, but that's what they said about Iraq, and that was a disaster. And then later on in the video, he says he's for democracy, but then he sort of says, but not direct democracy, really. He's just flopping around, and I'm really having a hard time wrapping around.
Did you read that story in the Daily Beast?
Yes, but it honestly doesn't
explain why he's so incredibly successful with the numbers. I'll tell you why.
I can't get past the hat. I'll be honest. It's like at the beginning of Trump when it was like, how are people seeing past his hair? And then we just fucking elected that guy. And I feel the same way about Tim Pool. Like I just look at him wearing a hat in the middle of the summer. It's like 102 outside, and he's wearing a stocking cap. I don't know. And then he opens his mouth and it's even worse. So
just think of it as his religious garb.
I mean, I think the bottom line is that I would love to see his demographics because I would imagine they are very. Oh, I guess he's gone. I think he's talking to like honestly, like 12-year-old boys, and there's nothing wrong. I mean, I have an 8-year-old boy, and he's fine. But you know, I think
he's fine.
Yeah, he's okay.
Okay.
But my point is that like the depth of understanding for a lot of people is pretty low, and he just talks, and that's basically what it is. He games the system a little bit. I think that there's some reason to believe that he may have figured out some mechanisms to drive some of his viewership, but I think, and then it starts becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy on some level, but it's unbelievable.
He was available, and we talked about this on a recent Left Reckoning video. Like, he started out as this Occupy Wall Street streamer and had basically just the capability to stream from down there, and people started getting annoyed at him because he was both recording what the he's saying he's an objective journalist, so he needs to publish everything, but also saying I'm an Occupy Wall Street activist and I'm here as part of you guys. And so activists started getting pissed about him, and then he rode that success. Like years later, you see this story in like GigaOM or whatever, these like tech sites saying, look at this Occupy Wall Street activist with the new Google Glass, and he's like walking around Vice News, and like it's different. Like Vice News gave him a job. ABC News, like he got credibility from all these different places just based on that.
Yeah. Did you see the Daily Beast article?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah. And also that guy, Henry, he was the guy when it first started. They couldn't reach him for this Daily Beast article. He was the guy who actually was sort of like was contextualizing things. And I think he was genuinely an activist. And they had a falling out, and it was unclear why, but I suspect it had something to do with him sort of realizing like this guy's trying to monetize this in a way that like I'm not quite comfortable with. But I don't know. They never be able to reach him, and we just haven't heard much about him.
The people they did reach who worked with Tim did say a lot of funny things in that article.
Yes, definitely worth reading. All right, let's turn to Joe Rogan, who this is, there, just as a sidelight. Well, all right, let's play this clip of Rogan. On vaccine passports.
Can't do what you want to do unless you do what I want you to do. I mean, Don Lemon was talking about that openly on CNN.
Yeah.
Don't have a vaccine? Can't go to the supermarket. Don't have a vaccine? Can't go to work. Like,
it's so strange that people want to say things like that. Like, that's the thing that blows me away. Why do people want to?
Because they're dumb.
They're dumb.
They're dumb. They don't understand history. They don't understand human beings. They don't understand human nature. They don't understand the history of every single country that's ever existed other than the United States. Up until 1776, every fucking country that has ever existed was run by dictators.
Right.
All of them. This is the first one where you had elected officials. This is the first experiment in self-government that actually worked, and it created the greatest superpower the world's ever known. It created the greatest cultural machine, the greatest machine.
We've got to take this a bit, I think, in chunks. So he doesn't seem to understand history. We've had vaccine mandates for quite a while, for you to go to school, for you to do other things, for you to participate in society. So this is
in this country.
In this country, which is not the only country that is a democracy, that is not a dictatorship. So that's another incredibly Americentric and ignorant view, while he calls other people's fucking stupid.
Yeah, here's a little bit of American history. Ben Franklin, when he was younger, was an anti-vaxxer and published anti-vax stuff for smallpox stuff, and then later lived to regret it after he lost a child to that same disease.
All right, but let's continue here.
Superpower the world's ever known. It created the greatest cultural machine, the greatest machine of art and creativity and innovation right fucking here. And how did it do that? It did it through freedom. Because when you give people freedom, you let people do whatever the fuck they want to do, they actually find ways to succeed and grow and thrive. But as soon as you put the boots to them, as soon as you tell them, you have to do this or you can't do that, you have to listen to me, now you have a mini dictator. You have one step away from a king. You have a one step closer. You're moving one step closer to dictatorship. That's what the fuck is happening.
Like that edict that we had in this country where you Can't have child labor. Like we're going to have child labor laws. You can't do that. You have to send your kids to school. I mean, aside from the vaccinations that the kids need when they're at school, if they want to attend there, like these mandates, like you need to pay Social Security taxes. A mandate, incidentally. Keeps 2/3 of our elderly out of poverty. Building codes, which I know that he appreciates. You don't have the freedom for building codes. Like, I mean, this is not consistent with some things that he said in the past.
No, there's a shift here.
Well, I don't know if there's a shift or there's just like, he's just not, his thinking is just not consistent, but continue.
Well, I mean, that's okay. But I'm just shocked just really quickly at how revelatory he thinks his American exceptionalism is, but.
Closer. You're moving one step closer to dictatorship. That's what the fuck is happening. That's what's going to happen with a vaccine passport. That's what's going to happen if they close borders. You can't enter New York City unless you have your papers. You can't go to here unless you have that. You can't get on a plane unless you do what I say. And people say, whoa, it's all about protecting people from the... No, it's not. It's not, because we've shown this is a fact. Just a couple of months ago, the idea of a breakthrough case was unheard of. Nobody heard of anybody catching COVID that had a vaccine, right? That was the whole idea. You get a vaccine, you don't have to worry about it. Now we know not only do you get it, but you can spread it. And some people have died. Apparently, it's a small number. I don't know what the numbers are, but I know that most people who get vaccinated, when they do have the disease, they have a better time of it than the people who are unvaccinated. But where are the people out there calling for people to get healthy? Where are the people out there calling for people to lose weight?
Now, wait a second. See, this is what's so muddled about this. I can't tell if he's saying that. I can't quite tell what his argument is here in terms of like the vaccinations. We don't know. There's a variant. We really don't know. I mean, at this point, it certainly appears that the vaccine inhibits your ability to get hospitalized, to get severe COVID. It certainly appears that way. We don't really know if it inhibits your ability to pass it on at all. It may be just a question of like, it has 10% efficacy in terms of like your ability to pass it on.
Fine.
It has 10% or anywhere from 10 to 60% to 90% efficacy. The point is, this is a pandemic with a novel a pathogen, and we just don't know. And the idea that this is simply some way of trying to like control the population for the sake of becoming I don't know who is supposed to be the dictator here. Was it, is it Anthony Fauci is the dictator?
Well,
where was this guy when he should have, when Bloomberg said no more 20 ounce or 40 ounce sodas?
Well, he should have been, I would imagine he's against that, but that's...
But that's what he's coming in at the end. Like, where are the people saying that you should stay healthy? Well, I mean, that's why we don't have those those massive big gulps anymore, so people can't just drink that the sugar water. That's why when they outlawed those trans fats, they were essentially plastic. The same
also,
people
isn't he smoking a fucking cigar as he's lecturing people about being healthy? Like, are you gonna say that people can't smoke or you can't?
We did.
Well, okay, then what? Then where are you getting off about freedom? Vaccines keep people healthy. That's exactly what the whole concept is.
His argument could have been and was applied to rules about not smoking in public buildings, to seat belts, we could just go on and on. I mean, why? Like, if you take his argument to its natural extension, why can we allow building codes?
And I mean, it's also just fatuous that he's looking across the world and comparing governments. Like, no, you don't. First of all, forget what he says about 1776. It's just like the basic idiocy. But right now, there are all sorts of governments that are, like the UK, for instance, vaccines if you want to go to a nightclub. It's not because there's been any like sort of march towards dictatorship that wasn't evident before COVID. It's just, this is a public health measure, you idiot.
Well, I mean, if people any child or anybody should be able to get into a club, then like why? I mean, maybe he'd actually argue that 21 shouldn't be the drinking age, but there are restrictions for nightclubs. Now there's an additional one for a vaccine in the middle of a pandemic.
And the interesting thing here is there was, Ben Burgess had a tweet the other day where it was something like, people should not, make the mistake. The idea of a vaccine passport, or basically saying vaccine requirement to, let's say, go on a plane, right? Commercial, to engage in certain commercial activities. And of course, the government's not mandating this. The companies themselves are.
Yeah, well, it's a dictator. It's a broad, amorphous, hundreds and thousands of people dictator.
But the interesting thing here is, if that is coercive, which I think it is coercive. That's the whole idea about public health, is you are trying to convince people to be healthy for the sake of the broad public. Imagine how coercive it is if you're the only source of income. Like, I mean, if you're saying that it's like coercive to say that you need to do something before you get on an airplane, why just stop at your understanding at just the idea of vaccination? Why not also include the idea of like pay?
Well,
like why should I be forced to pay any more than I should be forced to get vaccinated?
Why should you be barred from drinking and driving, right?
Well, that's, exactly.
That's an anti-freedom measure. That's not a public health measure. So what if you get behind the wheel and you hit someone and kill them? That's infringing upon your God-given right to do what you want.
His argument would be, well, when you drink and drive, you're endangering other people. Well, hello. During a pandemic, if you do not take all the measures that are available to mitigating the pandemic, and yes, we do not have a direct correlation. We cannot say, because it is a new pandemic, because this is a novel coronavirus, as we used to call it, we don't know exactly what the efficacy of anything is going to be. It's quite possible that it turns out that the J&J, they're saying, may actually be more effective.
Right. Well, that's
than Pfizer and Moderna. We don't know. We're talking about collecting data. And of course, it's that much harder to collect data because you got people out there saying that, like, well, I'm not going to be subjected to collecting data. I mean, the fact is that it's very difficult. There is no one-to-one relationship between knowledge and our understanding of this. And we do know that at the very least with the wild type, the vaccine was wildly effective. We do think that it's mitigating the impact of Delta. And we don't have specific numbers in terms of its efficacy, in terms of contagiousness. We don't even have specific numbers in terms of its efficacy in keeping people out of the hospital. We don't have exact numbers on how much more effective it is at preventing deaths, but we know that it's somewhat. And so you do it for the same reason, in that, like, I can't tell you how many times somebody gets drunk and drives, they're actually going to kill someone else or maim someone else or hit someone else. But we know that there is a significant risk of it. And so we say no drinking and driving. And
that's a part of our culture that's been the epicenter and created.
We're inhibiting freedom there.
Well, it's almost like, Joe,
can't get on your horse.
It's almost like our hegemonic American culture is like self-reproducing, and the fact that we're a world superpower makes it seem like our culture and our way of life and this mythology he's suddenly subscribing to is like the best of the best, which was a bizarre
but even if you think
after
it is,
calling other people stupid.
But even if you think it is the best of the best, why can't I ride my horse down the street in New York City? Like, my freedom has been inhibited.
Point is that fine?
This country,
yes,
I will have you know, was built upon people being able to ride their horse in town. Do people forget that? Why can't we do that today? Do you think that we would have become the pioneering nation that we are without the horse, and yet I am inhibited from riding my horse down Flatbush Avenue. Like, I mean, that's the thing. Even if you accept his silly premise of we are, special and unique in the whatever way he's talking about. The idea that we have inhibited certain behavior in the past for the sake of society has been here since day one. Since day one.
And by the way, has is every society pretty much. It's just
the
a
ones
decision.
that still exist.
It's just a decision on where you draw the line.
Exactly. It's all arbitrary. And he's deciding to draw it
And
there.
they've made, and bringing it back to drunk driving, bringing it back to seatbelts, airbags, they've made the same slippery slope argument throughout history, and nothing has come of it because these are public health provisions, and people fearmonger in the same way. And Rogan thinks he's being revelatory, and everybody else is so stupid as he makes 6 incoherent points back to back to back. I don't understand this turn. I mean, like, at least in the past, he was somewhat, reasonable, but maybe I'm just, growing and figuring it out as I go too.
Yeah, I think you're being generous.
Perhaps.
He has a huge audience of people who definitely do not want to hear him say things like vaccine is a good thing for you to do.
Well, because look, it's a boring take. Right? I mean, it's a boring take. Like the authorities, like I'm more or less saying that what Anthony Fauci is reasonable. Like, how do you drive a show that way?
Well, I mean, and also he seems drawn to these anti-authoritarian or anti-establishment types, no matter
the guy
whoever they
on there
are, right?
is this right winger who from Black Rifle Coffee Company.
But it's weird to have a desire to profile anybody who's anti-establishment and find that to be something that you're drawn to, and then also seemingly be obsessed with American exceptionalism. Right?
I mean, it's just sort of right winger stuff.
Right, but well, like that, it's kind of like what we talk about with Glenn, right? We could spend time picking apart Glenn's, new choices, but in the end, it's just like, oh, you're right wing.
I am reminded that Chicago letter carrier. Let's not forget that Rogan got COVID at a rich person party and had the money to treat it.
Yeah, when he talks about, all right, that's another thing. When he talks about people and why aren't we talking about healthcare? Okay, Joe, come out in favor of universal healthcare and Medicare for all on your show and talk about it every single day, because the way that we could prevent illness and long-term adverse health effects, the best way is prevention. And the reason we don't have adequate prevention in this country is because we have a completely maniacal healthcare system.
And this is also
so talk about that, dude.
Well, it's also like, look, he understands the concept of building codes, right?
Right. That's
now,
a great clip.
what are building codes about? They are inhibiting the market from sacrificing people's health for the sake of their profit. Now, he understands that concept. Well, then, if you're worried about people's health, let's outlaw junk food. Let's outlaw junk food. Let's have government fund the creation or the mitigation of food deserts.
Yeah. Also, who's telling people to get healthy? Like Michelle Obama, you idiot.
Right, and it's not. It's not enough.
Working.
And the thing is, but that's the thing is that it's not enough.
Yeah.
It's not enough. In the same way that it's not enough to say to people, like, when you hire a contractor, hire the guy that knows what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Joe can say, like, well, look, if you take the time, you can learn how to treat your body correctly and be healthy. But the point is that most people don't live the life of a comedian. And having led the life as a comedian for, I don't know, close to 20 years, and then getting a job where I got to go to work every day, I can tell you, it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference. And then the difference between having kids and not having kids.
Well, his lived experience is that he worked in construction growing up, so he has a perspective on that where he understands these things, but everything else, okay.
Well, that's the point.
Well, now I'm a rich guy, and it's all about learning how to be healthy, right? That's enough. And that's going to be something that informs my politics and my takes. And then underneath that is this current of resentment about the COVID restrictions, so I can't do my live shows with my rich friends. Cool. You're saying something so interesting, guy.
But it's really more important to like him, the person. The idea is the ideology behind it. There's no coherence to it. It is the same thing. The need from building codes is the same reason why ultimately during a pandemic you need to have people get vaccinated. It is the same dynamic.
Right. I wish that one building code thing was the consistent through line, but it's the inconsistent part.
Delta Mail. All right, we'll take one more phone call. Final call of the day, calling from a 570 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Yes, this is Dave from Scranton, Pennsylvania. Thank you for taking my call.
Dave, you are the final caller of the day. What's on your mind?
Yes, two quick points. We know how awful Cuomo is, Governor Cuomo is. Yep. He probably won because Mario was his father. But along with the sexual assault, he was also called out for the nursing home deaths, as he should be. But so should DeSantis for, his nursing home deaths. We know that DeSantis lied about the death numbers in Florida, and that's just the least of it. But yet, since Cuomo is so terrible, that part of the disaster in Florida isn't being talked about. And also the private insurance, the private nursing home companies that didn't take the precautions that they needed to protect patients, they're not being called out. They're not being called out for, they're for profit. They're owned by massive healthcare companies and or vulture capitalist companies. My point is just because how terrible the governor of New York is, those things are being ignored. Second, great show last week on explaining Nina Turner's loss. After hearing the calls or the IMs that came after it, when it comes to politics, how it's played, many on the left just don't seem to understand how politics works, how optics works, and why people on the left need to play it. And it's just not the dum-dums, on the left, But it just seems that many don't want to apply these common sense strategies to politics and to winning, elections.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the call, Dave. I think, look, that was the point I was trying to make earlier, is that the fact of the matter is, for better or for worse, Democratic voters, for the most part, like the Democratic Party. And it seems to be divorced from the question of what their policy preferences are. And that's just a fact. That's just a fact. And, I've spent 15 years criticizing the Democratic Party publicly. Anyway, from as a radio host and on TV and here. And
you've won 0 elections in that time.
Well, and I've won, but the point being is that it's one thing to sort of critique the party and attempt to get people to understand the deficiencies of the party, but it is a vehicle. And I think it's incredibly irrational for people to be attached to a bus as opposed to where the bus takes you. But that's human nature. And it is irrelevant if you're going to run, if you are accepting the premise that this infrastructure exists and I want to take it over, or I'm going to use it to get into office to do good things, then you have to accept the fact that the people who are going to vote for you, just at least in terms of the name, have some measure of appreciation for it. It's not the way that I am. It doesn't bother me that candidate X or Y would crap all over the Democratic Party and run for a Democratic, on the Democratic ticket, because it makes sense from a utility standpoint. But for a lot of voters out there, it's problematic. And you can spend your time and your resources and your energy on trying to change their mind about that. Or you could just run on the policies that you want, have them vote for it, and try and implement those. It's the same reason why, I took issue with Sanders opening up his campaign, trying to sell the notion of democratic socialism, because it's like, who cares what the label is? They're gonna call you, just do the stuff that people are gonna like. People don't, why work on trying to rebrand something? Whether it's the Democratic Party or whatever, who cares? The Republican Party 200 years ago or 150 years ago was the party that pushed public education. It's just a name, and you just go with it. That's my opinion. And it's, that's it. All right, let's read some IMs and get out of here. Delta Mail. We're absolutely undercounting COVID infections. My boss thought he had only a minor sinus infection. His doctor said no need to get a test since he was vaccinated. Fast forward a week, and a colleague he works closely with tested positive, also vaccinated. My boss subsequently goes and gets tested despite perfectly fine at this point and is also positive. Had our colleague not been tested, my boss wouldn't have gotten tested. There's no doubt in my mind we're undercounting.
Sounds like something I heard about a water sports dealership in North Dakota where everyone thought they had some kind of mold issue last summer because they didn't know they all had COVID.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I remember you saying that.
Pirate ate my Goodman. Oh, Pirate Amy Goodman.
Pirate ate my good man?
Yeah, that's weird. It's Pirate Amy Goodman.
You're hungry.
Were those kids on their bikes shooting at some food when they saw that from the ground, bubbling crude? Yes. No Labels just put out a poll saying that a majority support the bipartisan bill but oppose the reconciliation. But if you dig into the poll, they only surveyed 33 swing congressional districts, and there are a lot of leading questions. Come shower with Crowder. Glenn was on this small show, Primo Radical, saying you specifically in MR generally is pro-imperialism. Funny coming from the guy who used to love George W. and celebrated the war in the Middle East. I know.
Did he say Sam's name?
He's just, what a baby.
Too afraid.
What a baby. Honestly. That is, frankly, I don't care what he says on Primo Fanaticism, whatever the fuck it is. But it really is indicative of how vacuous he's become. I mean, it is, I don't think there's anybody who has a more clear record on where I have stood on these things, because I've been talking about it for 3 hours a day for 15 years.
I know, I'm waiting for Glenn to rate how a liberal would act so we can all figure out how we're supposed to be doing it.
Exactly. Boston Green Bro. As a longtime fan, I'm really looking forward to the Stitch Fix unboxing TikTok and the blog post about what you ordered. When the revolution comes, we should all have matching outfits. Shane from Canada. The Delta Epsilon variant will not be fun. If you're in Canada, remember, vote NDP and encourage others to do so, waiving the patents. North Dakota Nurse. I appreciate your coverage of COVID. It has helped me keep me sane living in a state full of COVID deniers. 2 weeks ago, our hospital only had 1 COVID patient. Now we have 14. One thing people don't realize that even before the pandemic, we had issues running out of hospital beds. We had patients holding in overflow areas, usually an ER bed, while waiting for a room to open up for them for years before the pandemic hit us. Major hospitals have always run super hot like this. This is what for-profit healthcare system is. Empty beds don't make money. I'm bracing for the next surge in our reason. It's coming and I'm already so tired. And that's the other issue. It's not just a question of bringing in cots. They're learning in Worcester, those nurses who are on strike because of understaffing there, they're having to shut down their services at this hospital. And they've tried to hire more people. You don't just, on Thursday, we decided we need 50 more nurses who can deal with the ICU. It doesn't work that way. Well, we were able to get the cots. We were able to get blow-up mattresses. It doesn't work that way. You only have so much equipment and so many trained people to know how to use that equipment.
Last wave in the Dakotas, there was word, I don't know if it ever came to this, but of using guards people to make up some of the shortage for hospital staff.
I mean, man. Q for short. Saw the new Suicide Squad superhero over the weekend. Part of the plot revolves around the U.S. backing a dictatorship in a generic South American nation to facilitate horrific experiments on its population. Many thousands of civilians are killed, and the U.S. is presented as complicit and uncaring. Not sure what that means for our society when even superhero movies depict the U.S. in the way. Yet when the theater lights come on, we all just go back to our lives and the empire marches on in real life. Emma's pirate impressions. Is there any impact in the conflicts in Africa from the Chinese investments? I don't know. That's a good question. Simon, the Drivers Co-op is looking for investors and have almost hit their fundraising target. And they are, oh yeah, no, I've already downloaded their app.
Yeah.
Oh, I will look for that. I guess in the app you can invest. Arcadem, spread is devastating. The RO in the Ozarks is looking closer to 8 than 5. Hospitals full. Non-COVID trauma, and you know, they're doing that thing in South Dakota again. Sturgis. Hospitals full. Non-COVID trauma and acute care patients dying because there's no one to treat them. It's spreading among double-vaxxed people. Arkansas Health Department and CDC are not tracking breakthrough cases unless they end up hospitalized. It's hard to overstate how effed we are here, how devastating the CDC's lack of action is. It's also how damaging reporting that COVID doesn't affect kids is. Delta is different. We don't know if it's due to the increased viral load or the way it's attacking less mature and unvaccinated kids. We're experiencing spikes in pediatric deaths, babies, and very young on vents. School has not started in much of the South, and it's not even fall yet. Yeah, I'm getting a little worried about it, to be honest. Well, I mean, I've already stated that. I don't know how to say that. COVID overall, watching an hour behind Titan Green at Lord, but just from early in the show, COVID overall is spreading faster, but the life cycle and how fast it replicates isn't what's understood. It's a magnitude shift because it's the same timetable for replication, but the yield is 2 to 3 times more. And why that context is important is because the COVID pre-Delta was already so scary with the speed it spread. Speed may not be appropriate at this point. The yield makes it such that it's less speed and more volume of how much there is. It is everywhere broadly. Jackson Munns. Just got to come up to Canada and get a little bilingualism. Trench Warfare, Sam says he would never recommend something he doesn't use, but he recommends Third Love bras. Do you have anything you want to share with us all, Sam? All right, fair enough. Thames Darwin. Sam, great to hear Milton Allimadi on the show. He's the absolute GOAT when it comes to commentary on African geopolitics. JG 3000 Bing Bing. Any idea why Obama and Biden were running in the Danarchy video? Oh, they were jogging at one point. I noticed that. Yeah.
Yeah, what was that?
It was during Obama years.
It was during the Obama presidency. They jogged alongside each other to a meeting or something. It was like a part of their... Oh, maybe it was one of those stupid, like, bromance videos that they put out.
It's weird. I wonder if it wasn't, like, you know, Biden
also just
going
not
like,
even real.
let me show everybody that I can run at that time. Even.
I can run with this guy. I should beat him.
It was a health campaign called Let's Move, making a film of the pair jogging around the White House.
See, Joe Rogan, they were doing exactly what you wanted.
Boom, boom, boom.
Sounds like a mandate to me.
All right, 3 more. Gagabool. Jury nullification is great, but a prosecutor would eliminate you if they suspect you might be so inclined. Even awareness of the term concept would be a red flag. Courts judges like to give jury instructions that lead people to believe their options are really narrow, dictated by civic duty, but it's not true. You have to come to be willing to play along until verdict time comes. At Voix Diary, go in, that's the thing where they ask you the question, see if you're suitable. Say you have an open mind, don't hate cops, etc. Then decide that even though, yeah, the defendant possessed the weed, the law forbidding this sucks, so F it. I say he's not guilty, nothing they can do about it. You can advocate your point of view to fellow jurors in deliberations, try and educate them, but don't be surprised if they don't believe you and think you'll get in trouble for not following the evidence. In this case, just stick to your guns and hang the jury, same effect. Interesting.
Yep.
Sad man. Hello, Sam. What's happening with America and specifically the Republicans? Recently, how you spot a Democrat now is that the person is showing an ounce of decency or empathy for other people. Otherwise, it's just lies and spewing conspiracy theories. Planning a trip to U.S. next October because I thought it would be safe regarding COVID, but now I'm not feeling safe about anything over there. I used to love the country after 2 trips some 20 years ago. Sorry to say I hear that. And the final I am of the day, Alex in Detroit. AMD integrated components for the supercomputer or go home. Matt, Bradley, Emma, good job today. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah.